time to look over the ocean, where there is one of the major business partners of Italy, namely the US market, because we have tonight the opportunity to ask our American colleague, Michael Mills, to give us an insight into the American approach to the ESG issue. We have a clear overview, thanks to our panelists, of the European approach. Now, I think it's really interesting for all of us to understand how it works over the ocean, because as far as I know, it's quite different from the European framework. So, first of all, I would like to ask you to give us a quick overview of your national framework on ESG.
Okay.
Do you prefer?
This one okay?
Yes.
So first off, just want to note the obvious. We got 3 over here and 1 over here, so I will do my best to...
The second one is missing in the sky.
But you speak English better than us.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. If I speak my English too quickly or whatever, please just interrupt me or ask
But
questions.
it will be a discussion among all of us.
And a simple discussion of the U.S. framework, I'm afraid, is impossible because ours is very all over the map, if you will, literally and figuratively. So I think first off, at least the way I think of it, in the United States, there's several terms that have been all kind of bashed together, and I think that's inaccurate. You've got ESG, climate change, sustainability, DEI, woke. In the US, those are all kind of batched together and all treated as the same thing on both sides of the political aisle. The reality is there's a lot of factors, E, environmental, S, social, G, governmental, and each of those have different sub-aspects, some of which are not particularly controversial at all in our old and cold laws, some of which are newer movements that are quite controversial. So, for example, the S for social, that encapsulates employees and discrimination. So we in the United States have had the Department of Labor for decades. No one's trying to get rid of the Department of Labor, Republican or Democrat. Discrimination, anti-discrimination laws based on age, gender, nationality, those again have all been in place for a while. Now there's some issues there on some of those items, but no one's trying to sweep away those laws. Where it's controversial in the States is on climate change and who in particular is regulating climate change, as well as some of the DEI initiatives, which again, DEI itself is a rather broad, somewhat vague in my opinion, label that's attached to a number of different, more specific items. So, specific to climate change, because that's where we in the States are much more confused, if you will, and frankly incoherent. We do have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and that was created by Richard Nixon, a Republican president, in the 70s. Again, that's not particularly controversial. What has become controversial is it being regulated in the sense of the securities laws and in the sense of financial statements and public reporting. That is controversial, and that is more a newer wave. So at this point in the United States, there is no federal regulatory framework on a lot of the issues that my European colleagues have discussed today. The SEC, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, the SEC has adopted rules, but those rules are in litigation right now. So right now we have kind of a state-by-state framework. And California is, I'm sure most of you probably know, California is progressive or on the left-leaning edge of things in a lot of different areas, including this one. They have adopted rules. They do have rules that are in the application stage and that are, there's a transition period. And those do apply to larger companies doing business in the state of California. The other states, I'm from Florida and we're lean more towards the Republican side. We don't have any such laws or rules, and the other states do not either. The SEC had proposed rules that were very controversial about 3 years ago. They then finalized those rules after about 2 years of deliberation. They finalized and adopted those rules in March, in the spring. However, the day they finalized them and adopted them, they were quickly sued in court, and so now those rules are stayed, meaning they're not applicable. It depends on the outcome of that litigation, whether they will ever become applicable, or in what fashion they will become applicable. So it's a mess. Overlaying that, and I don't want to skip too far to the third part of my discussion, but how that particular lawsuit is litigated, as well as the SEC's reaction to that lawsuit, is going to be largely dictated by our election in 5 weeks or 6 weeks. And so right now, companies in the States on this specific issue of securities disclosure in the realm of climate change are frankly very confused, because if the SEC's rules, which were adopted in a form that are not as stringent as what was proposed, if those rules go into effect, companies are going to need a lot of lag time and lead time to prepare to comply with those. And it costs a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of external advisor time. Good for us.
I'm so happy that ESG compliance is quite a crime. Sometimes it's a crime. So please, what's going on?
So that has become, you are correct.
Is it right? Yeah.
You are
Okay.
correct. And it has become quite the political issue. Specifically to that point, and where it actually really happens, it's not just in newspaper headlines, is in how the states invest their pension funds. So Florida, for example, happened to be one of the first to adopt this anti-ESG mindset and laws. And really what it is the governor dictates. The governor and the states themselves can't really force these labels and force this political discussion. What the governor did and what he can force is, for the Florida state pension funds, he outlawed them or prohibited them from investing in ESG labeled funds. That was the action that he took, and that's what has been labeled anti-ESG or anti-woke.
The purpose of the company, the purpose of the fund, which is the purpose? To make money and profit or be ESG compliant?
So the Republicans, which the governor of Florida is one who enacted these laws, they would say that. Their argument is, hey, for our pensions manage the money of our public employees, our teachers, our firefighters, our policemen and women. We want those funds making money for those people. And so if you're investing, you, the pension board, are investing funds that are labeled ESG, we, the governor, the Republican administration of the state of Florida, we believe that's using politics when the correct measure should be financial returns. And so that's the philosophy and that's the politics underlying those laws and those rules. After Florida enacted them, then Texas quickly thereafter did the same thing, and then other states who are more Democrat leading did the opposite, where they mandated that certain funds be invested in ESG labeled funds, because their mindset is, hey, in the long run, companies that are ESG compliant, which how they define that is often very squishy, they're going to make money in the long run because they're going to be doing the right things in the environment, and that's going to, investors are going to reward them for that. So there's a bit of a cross-philosophical debate there, but really what it comes down to is how the pension funds are invested. They then use that kind of specific point to then launch into a more general debate.
Okay. So please allow me to ask you one last question on behalf of everyone here, because we would like to know which will be the future of the ESG in case of Trump win or in case of Kamala Harris. What will happen?
I thought you were going to ask me who I was going to vote for. I was getting very
Apart from the fact that it is a political roundtable, please. Which would be the consequences in the two scenarios?
It's an interesting question, and it can be answered in a number of different ways. The very easy, short answer that would be just bullet pointed in a headline is Trump is anti-ESG and Kamala is pro-ESG. Mm-hmm. I think, however, when you dig into the details and try to formulate predictions, it's much more nuanced. Specifically to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which they're the SEC, they're who regulates and enacts rules in the securities realm, which is the type of lawyer that I am. right now in the Biden administration, that agency has been very active to the point where their budget has nearly doubled. A lot of the staffers have been complaining because they're financial accountants and now they're having to write environmental rules. Kamala has intimated and Biden has said that they're going to perhaps pull back some on that because it has become quite expensive and controversial. And one specific data point on that is just recently the SEC had created a climate change task force back in 2021. They quietly disbanded that just a couple months ago. And so it got reported in the news, and basically the current SEC administration, which again is Democrat, they felt like it was not effective and was kind of wasting time, effort, and money, and that those resources could be devoted more elsewhere. And just the whole ESG label has become so politically controversial that even the Democrats are walking it back a little bit. So in terms of predictions, I think generally you can expect that if it's Trump, it will be a lot of what the SEC has proposed or adopted is going to be rolled back. If it's Kamala, it'll be largely the same, although I think rolled back a little bit from what was discussed maybe 2 years ago. I do think, that's a short-term prediction for 4 years. I think when you scope out and look even longer term, I do think there is a general consensus that weather is getting worse. How that's being caused and who's causing that, perhaps that may be a little controversial. But I do think that you will see in time, and that time may be more like a decade or so, that we in the States will be doing more on the climate change aspect of it, as well as getting diversity more into management. It's just how it's done, maybe different methodology.
So we will check it back in a couple of years and see where we are.
If we still exist as a country.
Yeah, if the planet still exists.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all your valuable contributions.